Hello everyone. Today I propose to reflect together with you on an event of extreme sadness and poignancy, an event that is still being played out as I record this video for all of you. I'm referring to the tragedy. I hope it doesn't end in tragedy, and I want to hold on to that hope till the end. The potential tragedy of 5 precious lives being lost in their adventure to visit the site of the Titanic ship wreckage in the North Atlantic. As all of you know, the Titanic sank in the Atlantic Ocean on the 15th of April 1912. As a student of literature and as a student of Western culture, I have paid particular attention to this event because of its very profound symbolic overtones. This is not the occasion for me to burden you with those symbolic dimensions. That may be the substance for another day. Perhaps I should only mention this much, that the famous novelist Joseph Conrad, a man of Polish origin but who became a naturalized citizen of England and became quite distinguished as a novelist, and he was one of my favorite novelists. He wrote an article on the Titanic, which I read possibly 40 years ago, but it still remains very clearly etched in my memory. Now, in that article, Joseph Conrad sees the ship as a symbol of the collective pride that the Western technological materialistic culture has induced in the people in the so-called developed civilization, the technological civilization. And he makes a particular reference to the fact that when the ship was launched, it activated human pride to such an extent that it was said and it was repeated and it echoed in many parts of the Western world. And I quote, "Not even God can sink the Titanic." But quite mysteriously, the ship, which was carrying approximately 2,000 passengers, sank like a piece of lead to the bottom of the sea. And even today, we do not really know accurately enough what happened. We do have accounts of circumstances. All of us are familiar with the feature film that was made on the Titanic event. As far as this touristic attempt to visit the site of the wreckage, located some 13,000 feet below the sea surface, quite a difficult, risky and adventurous thing to do. 5 people are inside this module or the submersible, and each one of them paid $250,000 to make this trip. So obviously they're not the common folks, but irrespective of the economic status of an individual, the loss of life or even risk to life is a very serious matter, and that's the seriousness with which I make these reflections with you. There are many, many aspects of this event that hold me spellbound, but there's a limit to which how much can be squeezed into a video, especially given how limited the attention span is of people these days, and therefore I'll focus entirely, exclusively on one particular insight which I believe is extremely important. Now let's for a minute look into the submersible. 5 people are in it. And the submersible was provided with oxygen to last some 92 hours. Now, at the time of recording this message, as per the information available to me, the oxygen supply now left will last only for the next 12 to maximum 20 hours. Unprecedented rescue efforts are afoot. The best that human beings armed with technology can do is being done. And let's hope and pray that these efforts prove successful. But what I want to think together with you is this. Think of the oxygen. If the oxygen supply is exhausted before they are rescued from the submersible, then surely they could all perish. God forbid. So it's oxygen that sustains life, and this is of course kindergarten knowledge. I'm not sharing something new with you. But what I want to say is this. Oxygen is God's provision. I know that many of my viewers are secular in their thinking, but please have patience with me. None of us has created oxygen. We are not fitted with oxygen cylinders at the time of our birth. God has made these provisions at the very foundation of creation itself. Well, that's how I read the situation. So, from one point of view, it's this godly provision of oxygen that sustains life and ensures survival. But there is another hidden aspect, and that's precisely what I want to concentrate on. As human beings inhale oxygen and oxygenate their blood, which then transports that goodness to the rest of the body, as the byproduct of this process of life renewal, human beings put out something, and that's carbon dioxide. As far as life within this submersible is concerned, it's a very narrow module. It's not a big thing. People are sitting crammed up, and I can't imagine anyone sitting crammed up for 5 days, 4 days, 5 days. But anyway, let's concentrate on this. So even as they are breathing in, breathing out, they're actually putting out a lot of carbon dioxide. So their well-being is influenced now by 2 factors, and this is extremely important and very interesting. One is oxygen, which is God's provision to sustain life, and the other is the carbon dioxide that they put out. Now, this insight has many ramifications. I have to admit to you that this is the first time I'm meditating on this, and therefore my thinking on this is not particularly clear, but let's think together all the same, and I commend it to you for your continued thinking. Now, therefore, this particular pattern challenges me to realize that life is continually being affected by whatever we put out. Not just in the form of carbon dioxide, but in the form of everything else, including what we speak, what we do, and the choices that we make, the quality of life that we achieve or we deny, the quality of personality that we neglect or attain. Everything affects. And I remember, I think, reading in one of the books by Sartre a long time ago, that to exist is to murder. To exist is to murder. There is violence embedded in the very act of living. At that time, probably I read it 25, 30 years ago, at that time the gravity of this insight did not hit me hard enough, but now I can understand it slightly better. So all of us have to be very sensitive. Now, as far as the 5 people unfortunately stuck within the submersible are concerned, they would very well understand the critical importance of the carbon dioxide that they produce within their environment. Why? Because their environment is very limited. Fortunately, or is it unfortunately, God has given us an seemingly unlimited environment as compared to the crammed up little space that these 5 Titanic wreckage visiting tourists are concerned. Now, it's because their living space is limited, the acuteness of the extent to which they undermine the sanity, the health, the wholeness of their environment by the very act of existing. They're not doing anything untoward. By merely existing, by merely breathing, is keenly felt. It becomes obvious. But because the environment given to us, the total world given to us is so huge, each one of us is blissfully unaware of the extent to which we undermine the health and wholeness of creation. And perhaps through this episode, we need to become a little more aware, But I am not particularly concerned about, though we all have to be concerned about, the sort of pollution that people produce by way of their lifestyle-related pollutions. There are many, they are serious, they need to be minded. But that's not what I want to focus on in this unit. What I want to focus on is this, and that is subtler than the other. There are 2 types of pollutions. One is pollution as a consequence of what we do. But there is another category of pollutions, and that's a spiritual category. Pollutions on account of who we are. Now, if we don't become the kind of people we ought to be, if we don't become fully developed in all 3 aspects or dimensions of our personality, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, if we don't exemplify the glory and greatness of life, or in the words of Jesus Christ, if we don't become the light of the world, then we are the darkness of the world, which means that we have an impact, a negative impact on the world. Just as the carbon dioxide exhaled in the Titanic Submersible has an impact, and the impact, as I said, is more immediately and keenly perceived because the environment is so limited. So, the great thing about spirituality, as I understand it, is that it sort of makes our awareness subtler and more acute. Now, if you are not spiritually developed, then you can afford to be insensitive to the fact that you are polluting the environment by the kind of person that you are. And in the secular world, you need to become aware of it only in terms of law. For example, if you do something that's violative of the law of the land, then you get into trouble, you could land yourself in a prison. But that's not the only problem that spirituality recognizes. The more fundamental issue that spirituality addresses, and I think that's far more important than the legal concern, and in fact the legal concern is a consequence of neglecting the spiritual concern. The quintessential spiritual concern is that human beings are not growing and developing to the extent that they cease to be polluting presences and becoming purifying presences. You can be either a polluting present or a purifying present. I've been a teacher for 43 years. I can tell you that I've come across some individuals, thank God they're very few. I can count them on my fingers over 40 years. Their presence pollutes the classroom. Thank God I've had many students, and I remember them with much affection. I've had many students whose presence purifies the classroom. And this is true of our personality wherever we are. The classroom, whether the working space, whether it's at home, whether it is in the social context or whatever, the cultural context, we can all be purifying, ennobling, enriching presences. The human presence is so important. Modern culture is obsessed with activities, actions. It has become blind to the importance of presence. And I tell you, presence is more important than activity. Let me give you an illustration and I close. In 1994, I was stricken with partial paralysis. My neck was seriously affected. I lost movement in my left hand. 3 of the discs on my the cervical part of my spine, slipped or seriously affected, and I was bedridden. And I tell you, in that state, someone just coming and being near you was more important than winning a Nobel Prize. That experience spread over 3 months of sheer helplessness and complete derailing of my life, being confined to bed, made me realize the incredible, the indescribable value of human presence. I did not need a great person to come and sit with me or stand near me. Anyone, even a mentally retarded person, even a little child, even a wrinkled face was the feast of life for me. That's the value of life. So, if we don't develop ourselves in that fashion and we become mere caricatures of what human beings ought to be, then by our sheer presence we pollute. Just as, unfortunately in this instance, by the sheer activity, the inevitable, unavoidable activity of breathing, which includes exhaling carbon dioxide, the individuals, alas, undermine or compromise the life-sustaining quality of the air around them. And I pray sincerely to God Almighty that the current rescue efforts to bring them out of peril would succeed. And I would like to hold on to that hope till the end, and that their families and friends would have reasons to rejoice when their rescue is completed. And I commend these thoughts to you, my friends. And I am sure that you'll continue to follow upon these on your terms and your own way. Have a great day. Thank you. See you soon.
I2I News, an eye for truth. I2I News സബ്സ്ക്രൈബ് ചെയ്തിട്ടില്ലാത്തവർ ഇപ്പോൾ തന്നെ സബ്സ്ക്രൈബ് ചെയ്യുക. നോട്ടിഫിക്കേഷൻ ലഭിക്കുവാൻ ബെൽ ബട്ടണും അമർത്തുക.